that they're showing from Franklin we've had
All right.
for at least 6 years.
Oh,
Longer.
maybe they got it from our website. Maybe our website's wrong.
The state's website is fine.
Is it?
Let's get started. We're restarting. Morning again. We're following today's hearing. Senator Clarkson, could you join us at the table? Thank you.
At the table, I'm just now, you know.
It's Wednesday, January 24th, 2024, and resuming the second half of our morning's meeting, a joint meeting with Senate Economic Development, Housing and General Affairs, and Senate Natural Resources and Energy. We're talking about housing and regulatory reform, and we're picking back up again. Our next guest is Megan Tuttle, Director of the Office of City Planning, City of Burlington. Good morning, Ms. Tuttle. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning, chairs and all of the committee members. Thank you for the invitation to join you this morning. I just want to note that I appreciate that I'm in the middle of this group here this morning. So I've really enjoyed the opportunity to hear from so many statewide experts in their fields that have already spoken to you today. As Chair Bray said, my name is Megan Tuttle, and I am the Planning Director for the City of Burlington. I am also one of the working group members that prepared the report on municipal delegation that was directed by Act 47 last session. As planning director, I lead a team that's responsible for long-range planning and the creation and maintenance of the city's zoning bylaws. I also work closely with the staff that administers our local permitting process. In the near decade that I've worked with the city, our council has adopted dozens of changes to our bylaws to better define and implement our planning goals and be responsive to the changing dynamics in the city. Many of these changes have been about removing barriers to housing creation, from streamlining the permitting process within downtown, to making it easier to build an ADU, to implementing new rules to manage short-term rentals. Today, we are working on other major housing-focused changes, including to enable the sort of neighborhood-scale housing solutions that were the subject of the municipal zoning provisions of Act 47. We also have a long history of participating in the state's designation programs. Just this fall, we received approval to expand our neighborhood development area designation to incorporate an area of the city that was recently zoned to support a new neighborhood's creation. As Kathy Beyer noted, I mention these designations because they're significant in their demonstration that a municipality has gone a long way to plan for and regulate many of the issues that Act 250 is designed to review. Despite this work and many community and state efforts, our state is still experiencing a number of significant and in many ways unprecedented housing challenges, many challenges to provide the housing that is needed for Vermonters. Not all of these challenges are within state or local control, but they are important factors that are influencing and bring increased attention to the processes and laws that we do control. I agree with what Charlie Baker said earlier, that these laws can and do influence developer behavior. And as a planner, I welcomed the steps that were taken to advance municipal bylaws through Act 47. Just last evening, in a meeting with our Planning Commission, we were discussing the city's inclusionary zoning ordinance, a policy that we've had since the 1990s, which was novel at the time that it was adopted, which mandates that permanently affordable housing be created in new developments. This is an important and foundational housing tool that we need, particularly in this moment. And yet, we're confronted daily with the realities of our state's housing challenges. VHFA's 2023 annual report noted the steep increase, 76% increase, in fact, in the cost for constructing new multifamily housing developments since 2018. This means that for projects to deliver affordable housing in this environment, particularly if they're providing affordable homeownership opportunities, the gap between the cost to build and the allowable cost to sell that unit can be well over $100,000 per unit. Here in Burlington, we're searching for ways to find a balance between this reality while we maintain our commitment to ensuring new development provides permanently affordable housing. While this example is not about Act 250, I share it for a few reasons. First is that while not any one of these issues, Act 250 or municipal regulation alone are the reasons why housing can be difficult to advance in Vermont, we must consider that the cumulative impacts of these laws together can frustrate it. And second, I share it as a local example of what the chair said in his opening remarks. Through careful evaluation and evolution of our policies here in the city, housing creation and permanently affordable housing do not need to be in conflict with one another. As a professional planner, I completely agree that housing creation and the environment do not need to be in conflict with one another. However, what this example highlights is that we need to closely consider the purpose and outcomes of our laws and policies, and in this particular moment, ensure that any additional cost of regulation and complications of permitting are carefully weighed alongside the positive intended outcomes of those laws. As a member of the Vermont Planners Association, I've been engaged in conversations with planners around the state about Act 250 going back to the legislature's own commission in 2018. I understand and appreciate that changing this law requires careful consideration to preserve what has been strong and positive, while also recognizing that we have an opportunity to strengthen it to better achieve our shared goals. I echo others' support for the interrelated land use, Act 250 updates, and designation studies that are before you. I'm really encouraged by the coordination and synergy in the recommendations coming from these studies, particularly in their focus on how Act 250 jurisdiction can be relaxed in areas where careful planning and the evolution of both state and local regulations support growth in ways that reflect statewide development goals. Members of the Municipal Delegation Working Group were engaged in these studies and continuously circled back to understand the related implications on our work. We think these studies go a long way, and we continue to recommend municipal delegation as an additional tool that could build on those changes. Similar to what Catherine Dimitruk said, municipal delegation is not about weakening Act 250. The report recommends an Act 250 exemption for development within communities that have confirmed through a collaboration with their regional planning commission and the NRB that the municipal bylaws and permitting and enforcement processes are functionally equivalent to the criteria that Act 250 would have otherwise reviewed. As members of the working group, we did a deep dive into our municipal ordinances to evaluate where there are overlaps between these laws and the criteria in Act 250. We found a high level of overlap, certainly some areas where our municipal planning can be strengthened. But here in Burlington, in the time since Act 250 was enacted, and our bylaws have become much more comprehensive and robust, and we estimate that we currently regulate approximately 90 to 95% of what Act 250 also reviews. The delegation study recommends a process through which municipalities can demonstrate their comprehensive nature of their laws, a process through which the NRB can consider applications after a public hearing, and establishes an agreement with municipalities and the Act 250 to administer local permits in lieu of Act 250. It does not fundamentally change Act 250 on its own, and we think it can be an important complement to the other reforms that you're already considering. Notably, it also builds on other forms of municipal delegation presently enabled in statute, such as for the State Shoreland Protection Act and for building code and fire safety standards, both of which Burlington administers in lieu of state permits today. We believe that this is an important complement that can allow municipalities with the regulatory and staffing resources to support statewide housing goals, particularly as you consider the recommendations of these other studies and really as you define the areas of the state that would fall within these certain planning areas or tiers. In particular, one potential gap I see from Burlington's perspective, where municipal delegation can be important, relates to how small housing types, the sort of duplex and 4-unit buildings that were the focus of Act 47, would actually get implemented. Areas like Burlington's New North End, which represents half of the city's land area, a quarter of the population, and is served by infrastructure, where many of these new home types could be accommodated, do not currently qualify for exemption from Act 250 under the state's designation programs and seem unlikely to be exempted under the new frameworks contemplated in these studies. The city does have a local review process called Major Impact that's substantially similar to Act 250. And in the New North End, this would require a very detailed level of review for projects as few as 5 units. Projects of this small scale are much more susceptible to the escalating costs of housing development and duplicative development review processes. And ultimately, I think municipal delegation could be an important tool to lean on that robust level of local review and ensure that high quality development is happening at multiple scales in the city. So just want to be here to, again, echo my support for the efforts and appreciate this committee's collaboration and focus on these issues this morning. And happy to be available to answer any questions about any of this later.
Thank you very much, Ms. Tubb. We're holding questions and conversation for the most part till we're done to see if we have any time actually left over. And with that, we thank you, and we're going to move on to Kim Taylor, former chair of District 3 Environmental Commission. Mr. Taylor, good morning, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you. I have to say I'm somewhat humbled to be speaking to you in the company of this illustrious group. For those of you who might not know me, I'm a retired vegetable farmer. I wish I could get this down a little bit here. Here we go. Having farmed for 43 years with my wife, Janet, in the village of Post Mills in the town of Thedford, Vermont. And our farm, thanks to Act 250, actually has grown to, and I'll explain that in a moment, to 56 acres of mixed vegetables, berries, and 20 greenhouses. And we grow approximately 30,000 pounds of tomatoes annually. For 11 years, I was chair of the District 3 Environmental Commission. And the towns included our population ranges from Hartford of about 10,668, depending on your numbers, and as small as Granville with 301. The district includes towns in Orange County, Windsor County mostly, and two actually in Addison County. We go right up to the top of the snowball. And our towns are reflective of what is pretty much statewide, where in the state, a total of the state has 125 1-acre towns, which means those towns do not have subdivision and statutorily approved subdivision zoning, which is about 45% of the towns, and then 137 presently are 10-acre towns. Additionally, I've served on the Town of Thedford Development Review Board for the past 20 years, and I'm presently its chair. And we've had zoning and subdivision bylaws since 1972. And finally, for what it's worth, I graduated from Vermont Law School in 1978 and clerked for Jonathan Brownell, one of the authors of Act 250. Senator Bray asked us to explain our experiences with Act 250 openly and honestly, and I was going to share a couple of anecdotes with you. First, as a young farmer in the early 1980s, we had a small fledgling farm. I abandoned the world of farming, of law practice rather quickly, and there was two neighbors who were going to build next to us over the course of the next 10 years. One of them wanted 10 2-acre lots, and Act 250, which was chaired by Allison Flannery at the time, heard testimony, and they denied that Act 250 application. And the long and the short of it was the 10 units were denied because of lack of clustering, no showing of unable to build on its remaining 70 acres, and potential impact on the farm. The developer turned to us and sold us the land, and we continued to farm. Then later on, there was a proposal for 56 units. This is rather ironic when we're speaking about housing here today. I'm sure you can see that. Were proposed on some very prime agricultural soils. And the long and the short of that was 24 units were finally settled on. 15 acres of prime agricultural soils were conserved. And in the upshot of that, as I feel, is that had all these units been built, Thedford would have built a middle school, which might stand empty today. We would not have continued farming. The small acreage we had would not have served us for that, to make a living, I do not believe. We would not have fed thousands of Upper Valley residents, given away thousands of pounds of food to willing hands, and hired hundreds of local teenagers to work on the farm. And today the farm is conserved. We no longer own it. We sold it about a year ago. It's conserved by the Vermont Land Trust, and a young 37-year-old farmer who started working for us when he was 14 and then became a partner, owns what is a very successful vegetable farm. And this all occurred right on the edge of what you would characterize as a rural working lands area and the edge of Post Mills. Now, as chairs District 3, over the 11 years I chaired, we issued over 200 permits. We denied only 10 applications. Of the 10 denials, 3 were appealed. During this entire 11 years, there was never any applications which concerned housing. I think that might be of interest, except a section 6086B downtown project known as 132 South Main Street. It's a kind of hybrid process under 10 VSA 151 designed to expedite applications in downtown development districts. So this application is to show you, and it's in my testimony here that I've submitted, was received in December of 2019, and the date of decision was issued on 4/2/20, 104 days after receipt. And I've included a picture of that beautiful downtown building. It's 5 stories high. I think it's really quite exciting. There's a Twin Pines project, which was a PHP, a priority housing exemption, on Sykes Avenue, which we never saw. It's 30 units. And presently, Simpson Development Corp has proposed 192 market units and 48 priority housing units in Hartford, which will be exempt under Act 250. So I am strongly in favor of permitting municipalities to apply for and receive the quote planned growth area designation as proposed in H687. This would exempt them from Act 250 review. I am greatly concerned, however, what remains. I'm sorry about my dog here. Let me shut the door shut.
Your law clerk is acting up.
Yeah, the neighbors skiing by. We one of the things I do in the winter is we on our 100 acres here, I groom 10K of ski trails, and she wants to get out and go play with the dog. Anyhow, I'm very, very concerned that with the exemption in either a tier 1 or however you want to characterize it, that we will lose this priority housing incentive. So I encourage you in any bill you draft to include some kind of incentive for priority housing, affordable workforce housing, however you want to characterize it. I think that is critical to this change. I'm also in favor of making permanent the Act 250 jurisdictional threshold for a permit from 10 units to 25 for downtowns, neighborhood development areas, village centers with zoning and subdivision laws, and growth centers, as long as the projects do not impact critical resource areas, such as primary agricultural soils. And I've mentioned the workforce housing. I thought some excellent thoughts came out today about legislation requiring towns to adopt subdivision. Well, actually, this didn't come out, but this is something that I feel strongly about, that it may be time for towns to have to be required to adopt subdivision and zoning bylaws, and we no longer would have the 1 acre towns. And I'm strongly in favor of this concept of bottom-up form of planning, to which Gus Seelig alluded. And ultimately, I'm strongly in favor of the tiered approach to Act 250 review that I believe is in H687. I don't know if you all have had time to look at it. I think Chair Sheldon and Representative Bongartz have done a wonderful job there. And finally, as climate change rages on, oh my gosh, this dog, why did she do this now? We need to strike a balance.
It's okay. It's kind of
Okay, good. We need to strike a balance. As climate change rages, we need to strike a balance, I feel, between building affordable housing, providing an equitable education, and preserving land to feed those who live in those homes and the children that attend those schools. But I think you may have thought that I would be opposed to some of these recommendations that came out of the NRB plan, but I think most of them are excellent. But along with tier 1, A or B, however you want to characterize it, we need to concentrate on the tier 2 and the tier 3 as well. We can't ignore them. One last final thing, and I included, just note you're going to be missing out on a lot of fees with these exemptions potentially. We had 4 car dealerships. Yeah, we had 4 car dealerships come into Sykes Avenue in Hartford in my years there. We had application fees of $125,000, transportation fees of $41,000, which went to help build the roundabout, and offsite mitigation fees, which went to the Housing and Conservation Board of $34,000. These were all minors. We got them done in very short periods of time. So just be aware that you're going to be missing out on some fees potentially here. And I guess that's all I have to say.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, and thanks for following up on the whatever you had in mind, is exactly what we wanted to hear. Wasn't looking for any preconceived notion of testimony, so thank you for that. And
Personal privilege.
yes, Sarah McCormick.
This is Dick McCormick. I'm your one of your predecessors as chair of District 3. And just greetings from the past.
And now one of your senators.
Yeah.
I know,
Everybody knows that.
All 3 of your senators are here.
Yeah.
I know you are, and I miss Mark too.
Good to see you.
There is Mark. Yeah, all 4 of us are here.
Okay.
Floating.
Well, thanks so much again for your service on that board and all the innovative stuff you've helped make happen over your way.
Yes, here.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, and with that, we'll go to our next guest, which is Brian Bannon, zoning administrator and floodplain manager for the town of Brattleboro. Good morning, Mr. Bannon. Thanks for joining us from my mom's hometown.
Thanks for having me. And also I would like to thank all the people who worked on these studies this summer and winter. They've done really great work, and really helpful that it will empower small towns like Brattleboro, do our work, and encourage the development of more housing. Brattleboro is short 500 housing units immediately, and on a longer term, we're short 1,000 units. We're also a community of modest incomes, and many people are rent stressed and mortgage stressed. So doing housing that people can actually afford, tremendous challenge, heroic work, and any risk that we can reduce, any fee that we can cut back will help. Focusing on our developed areas allows us to make the most of our tax dollars. We can increase the use of our existing sewer, water, and road network. We can improve our public transportation. It creates opportunities for people to live and work in places where they can walk, where they don't have to have one car for every adult. And this is what Vermont land law has been trying to encourage: prosperous cities and villages and working landscapes. Brattleboro would like to pursue a tier 1 for our sewer and water area, and we certainly have the capacity to do local review that's adequate and equal to what's done by Act 250. Proposal for tier 3 for precious and irreplaceable natural landscapes is fantastic. There has to be some areas that are just known to be off limits for development. And continued Act 250 jurisdiction for areas that are between the settled centers and working lands is appropriate and necessary to reduce sprawl. We have found that some projects in our downtown were increased when the jurisdictional threshold was increased, and that's bringing needed homes to people in our community. We've also found that our upzoning and encouragement of mixed-use development in centers has been a necessary part of hazard mitigation. To relocate homes out of flood hazard areas, there has to be some place to actually build and places where we encourage that building. The designated program has us look at areas at low risk outside of flood hazard and river corridor areas and encourage building higher densities. This has allowed us to move people from floodplains where they've been repeatedly evacuated and faced flood damage in a tropical storm Irene, and get them to a safe haven where they don't need to worry about flooding that we've seen this year. I don't really have much more to say than that. Just thankful for the efforts to empower localities to make decisions for our communities that are compatible with the framework for state planning goals. Thank you.
Thank you.
Brian, and you have your senator here, Senator Harrison, who brought some of us
Yes.
down to see your work on Melrose Terrace. With Melrose Terrace in mind, I think, a great case study in getting lots of vulnerable seniors out of the floodplain. One of our takeaways was that it took several years because of permitting processes to relocate those seniors back in community. Can you go into a little bit more detail about that? Because that's our biggest concern, is once we get people, maybe on this side of the room, but once we get people out of floodplains, they need somewhere to go in short order, and it took maybe 7 years to relocate them.
Yeah, it was challenging. Barbara, we thought we had really pro-housing zoning. And we worked with housing partnerships and Evernorth to find locations for a new building to help people find a safe place to live. And as we looked at our regulations and tried to work with them, we found that we didn't actually have zoning that actually worked with producing parcels that would actually support an affordable housing project. So we went back and we did some additional reforms and came a little bit closer. We found a existing planned residential development, and we were able to use that instrument to get a place for the people to build a replacement housing. But then we found that in fact we had made an error and had missed a density cap. So we went back for a third round of amendments to allow for more housing. We got rid of density caps for the number of dwelling units per acre in our developed areas, and that's proved really, really productive as far as allowing for the development of new units and existing buildings, as well as this new larger project. So what I would say is that when we look at regulations and regulatory reform to promote housing, it should be an iterative process, and we should go back and test it periodically to see if it's actually achieving what we're looking for. For us, it wasn't. We wanted to have dense centers where people could walk and live and be safe. And it turns out we had really nice looking regulations, but didn't do that. So go back, test, have that be part of the process, see if we're actually creating lands and parcels that can be developed to meet our housing goals.
Well, thanks. Can you just say a little bit, I want to make sure I heard it right. 'Cause we've been hearing more about the like state level planning or RPC level planning, but are you saying that the biggest impediment that you had in Brattleboro was attractive but not highly functional municipal planning?
That's right. We had density levels, and in theory that would produce 16 units per acre, and that sounded really good. But we didn't have very many large parcels in residential areas that would support a building with 55 units, which is what we needed. Those larger buildings are necessary to make an affordable, manageable project that will be viable long-term. But again, we just didn't have those parcels. So it looked good in theory, but to achieve the density that we thought we could, it just didn't actually work. So we got rid of that density per acre cap, and we just established kind of form-based code that allowed for buildings of a certain size on a parcel, and the number of housing units that could be developed in those was whatever the developer thought practical as far as the size of units that were in demand. That actually produced the type of townscape that we were looking for, and it also allowed projects to be feasible and pencil out.
Right. Well, thank you so much for joining us from down there, and good to hear from the other end of the state. We're up here in Washington County.
Great. Thank you.
Of that, we're going to go to Charlie Hancock, who's the chairman of the Montgomery Select Board, jumping from one end of the state to the other. Good morning, Mr. Hancock. Good to see you again.
Good morning. It's good to see you all. Thank you very much for the opportunity today. Again, my name is Charlie Hancock. I'm the chairman of the Montgomery Select Board. though my day job is a consulting forester. Although sometimes it's hard to tell which one of those takes up more of my time. I participated in the NRB report, which has already been touched upon many times today. And I'd like to echo others who have pointed to this as a compromise framework, which addresses so many of the challenges that we face and which we're discussing here today. And I want to emphasize the word compromise because for our vision to actually work, the various components within that report really need to be considered as a package. And I think that's something that clearly came out of the work that we did together. Montgomery, which as you mentioned is tucked way up here at the northern end of the state, is a rural community like the majority of other towns in Vermont. We have what I would consider really robust zoning, but we're currently working with our RPC to make our bylaws even stronger, addressing many of the challenges that you're all already aware of. We're also in the process of developing a municipal wastewater system for our village centers, a principal objective of which is to increase housing availability. I should pause 1 second. I do have a couple slides I'd like to share, so if it's possible to enable the screen share, that would be excellent. So as a smaller rural community, our interaction with Act 250 looks a lot different than larger communities, which are addressing a scale of projects which are frankly an order of magnitude larger than what we're looking at, but it does have a significant impact here. One project I can point to is on a 16-acre parcel right in Montgomery Center, which is one of our 2 designated village centers, where our town plan and zoning seeks to encourage dense, compact development, and which will be served by our wastewater project. The parcel came under Act 250 jurisdiction nearly 20 years ago when the prior landowner began operating a small greenhouse on the site. Years of issues with one neighbor using Act 250 to tie them up into knots led the landowner to give up that enterprise, and the parcel sat vacant for nearly 2 decades. We now have a local developer, folks that actually live here in town with really deep roots in the community, looking to create a mixed commercial and residential development, which would result in over 35 units of new housing, specifically targeting workforce and seniors. But before they could even think of addressing any permitting, let alone Act 250, that same neighbor got wind of the land transfer and their intent and went screaming to our district commission, which set the ball rolling in a manner which was very discouraging and frankly demoralizing. In this case, Act 250 literally came to them. They didn't even have a chance to go to Act 250. Since then, these guys have faced many of the same burdens you've already heard about today, so I won't go into them, but dealing with pre-existing permit conditions, increases in time and expense, duplication of permit efforts, and frankly, living with a heavy amount of fear. This project is just one example of why the recommendations in the NRB report would provide permit relief for projects such as this in these areas where we do affirmatively seek to encourage growth and development, and why following those recommendations is so important. I also think it's important within the context of this conversation to highlight what we don't want housing development to look like. What you're looking at here is a 190-acre parcel in my own community of Montgomery, and they say a picture is worth 1,000 words. This parcel, which was historically managed as a working forest, sits within both the highest priority forest block, which connects this area of the Jay State Forest with the surrounding landscape, and within a highest priority connectivity area adjacent to Route 242. The land also serves as the headwaters and flood storage to a critical tributary of the Trout River, which passes right through Montgomery Center. We've talked about flooding many times today. The land was purchased and subdivided into 15 building lots in a manner which managed to leapfrog Act 250 jurisdiction in terms of timing, avoiding that 1055 trigger. This led to no opportunity for review or an opportunity to address design potentials which would negate the impacts which we're looking at. So now we're looking at a road system approximately 3,500 feet in length, or about 0.6 miles, 12-acre building lots, again, which managed to leapfrog any sort of review. I highlight this because the road rule, which is included in the NRB report, would have addressed this. It would have provided a backstop to catch something like this, and not to necessarily limit any development there, but to give an opportunity to design that development in a way which can mitigate the impact on these resource concerns. And we'll note that the property currently is for sale. The developer ended up pulling the plug on the project, so you can see the development that went on as far as the roads and the building lot infrastructure. but nothing was actually built up there. So we're currently seeking a conservation buyer to come in and buy that and to keep it intact as a working forest. So if any senators have $1.8 million lying around, please give me a call. Big picture, I think we need to advance a balance like what's proposed in the NRB report with exemptions in designated areas and resource protection, or at least the simple opportunity to review development in these areas that are so critical for resource concerns. Without relief in designated areas, I think we'll continue to see development in communities like Montgomery being pushed out of these designated centers and constructed in a way which bypasses review, similar to what we just looked at. We're seeing fragmentation of our forests, of these critical lands, not just occurring, but rapidly accelerating. And that's really concerning on a multitude of levels. Lastly, I think I'd be remiss if I didn't take a moment to highlight the connection between economic development and housing in communities like ours, and the need to address permanent relief for working lands businesses such as farm and forest enterprises. Tim spoke earlier about the importance of Act 250 in maintaining our land base, but I'd like to highlight that it's the success of these enterprises themselves which are foundational to maintaining the landscape that Act 250 seeks to protect and the rural communities like ours which depend on them. These working lands are what defines us as a state, and frankly, there are days when I fear that we're forgetting that. We often speak about resilience, and resilience in this context means economic viability. In order for these farms and forest enterprises to continue to feed communities and steward the lands for the multitudes of benefits they provide, they must be economically viable. This means supporting diversified income streams, adding value through secondary processing, and building infrastructure to increase efficiency of operations and embrace the opportunity for these enterprises to be partners as we consider natural climate solutions. Act 250 often stands in the way of this. The NRB report identified one potential solution or one step in the right direction, which would be lowering the ag soils mitigation ratio to 1-to-1 for forest processing enterprises. This is the same ratio we currently give industrial parks. I think this is a great start, but I think that more is needed, and I would really welcome the opportunity to discuss that further with you. And so with that, I will end my testimony. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hancock. I think you'll hear from Senate Natural Resources and Energy, in part because I'll express a personal concern and or interest. Today the focus is housing, and so that's drawn us to look most like at Tier 1, for instance. And I don't want us to find that we're giving short shrift to the natural environments that are out in like Tier 2 or Tier 3. So that's my own ignorance on how this might roll out, but the concern so you've highlighted that for us, and that's helpful.
His road rule photos are fabulous. Those are like totally illustrate the challenge and the battle we've had in the legislature.
Charlie, can you clarify exactly what loophole or window was taken advantage of with the 1055? What time period that was?
Yeah, so some of this predated me being in the community, but my understanding is that the subdivision of the lots occurred in a time frame where they managed to do it over 15 or 16 years, and so that 10-year window kind of lapsed and separated, and so they basically just leapfrogged it. They did, I don't know exactly how many they did in what framework, but they did just enough not to trigger Act 250, and then went back and did the rest right after that window had passed.
It's an interesting conundrum.
The RPC.
Yeah.
Hey, well, good to see you again. Thanks so much for coming in. And
Thank you so much. Take care.
That, Chair.
Yes, I have the privilege of introducing a friend and personal hero, Jessica Dandridge Smith. By way of context, just to embarrass her a little bit more, we met as part of the inaugural class of the USA Obama Leaders. And while we all showed up to Chicago as equals, some people were just a cut above the rest in terms of walking the walk at the intersection of social and environmental justice. And I think there's probably no city we can learn more from than New Orleans. And, as somebody in Jessica's work who has been fighting for the heart of New Orleans and for those least at the table and least represented. There's almost no one I could think of that could speak more to this really big vision of exactly what Seth pointed out. When you have a climate crisis and a housing crisis taken together, you get an equity crisis. So Jessica's a big thinker, and I'm really grateful she could join us. And I'll probably take an embarrassing picture to show all of our Obama leaders.
That's fine. Thank you, Keisha, for the wonderful introduction and I've been listening in since this morning, and so many wonderful thoughts and ideas, and many of the people are spot on in terms of the challenges as well as the solutions. And I know I do have 10 minutes. I will try my best to be brief. Although I could probably talk about this all day long. And again, thank you all for having me. I'm very honored to be invited and speak to you all, and hopefully provide some insights and inspiration, as well as provide some solutions for some of the challenges you all have been facing. As you all know, Louisiana is no stranger to the climate crisis, and in every single map of the climate crisis globally, Louisiana is on the front lines of that and is predicted to be partially, if not 2/3 of it, underwater by 2050. With that being said, I'm born and raised in the state of Louisiana, particularly in New Orleans, Louisiana. My family is multi-generational, and with that multi-generational bloodline here, that means that every generation dating back to my great-grandmother has dealt with immense flooding and loss. So growing up in the city of New Orleans, flooding is very common. We are a delta, we're below sea level, and we have the largest pumping system in the world, over 99 pumps to keep the city moving and thriving and going. We also have the largest port system in the world combined, right? So we have 5 of the largest ports, and most of the products that come from the Suez and Panama canals come up our Mississippi River, and then is moved along many different states and highways. And you guys probably know a lot about that, as well as ports. So that being said, we're surrounded by water, and so our livelihood is attached to it. And that means that our economy is based on it, whether it be ports, shipping, oil and gas, and energy, as well as food production and so on. With our lush waterways also comes with a lot of pain. And so my family has experienced flooding from Hurricane Betsy to Camille. And in my first direct experience with Hurricane Katrina, which hit the day before my 16th birthday. So I lived through many of the things that you all are talking about over 10 years ago, and now almost 20 if you're counting. And I've learned a lot in that process. I started as a youth organizer in 2006 to really figure out what does it mean to live in a city that is dealing with the ideas of redevelopment, rebuilding, and all of the challenges from housing, food insecurity, homelessness, and also redefining resilience. Resilience was placed on us as well, and the idea that people in Louisiana could deal with the challenges because we've dealt with them for so long, since the French and the Spanish came. So I'm saying all that to say that we have a long history, and with that comes a deep understanding of collective trauma around policies. And so when we talk about resilience in Louisiana, it is oftentimes attached to this concept. My organization was kind of born out of that. And so 2014, a document called the Urban Water Plan, which is actually just made 10 years, actually, and then we celebrated an anniversary event not long ago. That document was kind of, I would say, our holy grail or a Bible around resilience and green infrastructure, and re-understanding or re-engineering our landscape to learn how to live with it. One of the reasons why Louisiana continually floods is not just because we're a delta, because indigenous communities along the Mississippi River have been living there for over 5,000 years. It was because we decided to build slab on grade. It's because we decided to pave over many of the wetlands and coastal areas. And we also decided to pump. All of those things created a deep amount of subsidence, flooding, and nowhere for water to go. That was the result of Hurricane Katrina, where the levees had failed. There was nothing on the inside of the bowl, known as New Orleans, to take on that amount of water. And thus you have a massive, and still one of the United States' largest, most expensive natural disasters in the history thus far. I've been working in this space, as I mentioned, for a long time. And just to give additional context, I am a commissioner for the state of Louisiana for the Coastal Protection Restoration. And I am also the co-chair of the National Academy of Sciences Engineering on Resilience. So I'll leave you guys with a few different things. My organization does quite a few things, and mainly focusing on education and policy, as well as advocacy and workforce development. So we do many things, and we have over 12 programs running from lead line abatement, as well as community engagement frameworks for the state of Louisiana. Since last year in 2023, there's been an over $23 billion in natural disasters. 90% of those were caused by flooding globally. That has also increased flood insurance, which in some areas has gone over 300%. And in homeowners insurance, in states like Florida, Louisiana, and California no longer have it. And our last option of resort is the state insurance plan, which is not properly funded. If there were a disaster today, most Louisiana residents would be unable to rebuild, leading to a mass challenge around equity, around housing, and around just general rebuilding. Where do you go if you have no tax base? What does a state do if they lose half its population? In fact, the climate crisis is so bad in Louisiana that we rank 5th and highest amount of people that have lost residents across the entire country. We are ranking in the middle between cities that have extremely high cost of living. And our issue isn't cost of living. Our issue is the ability to live through floods, hurricanes, tornadoes, drought, and heat waves. So I leave you with something that I always think about, which is the 4 R's of resilience. Resilience is not a catch-all term. It should be considered a 4-level term, or there are 4 R's under that term. 1, you need resources, and you guys are probably very well aware of that. And by resources, it's not just financial. Resources is people, power, skills, and knowledge. The second thing is redundancy. One of the reasons why Katrina was such an epic failure was that there was no redundancy in the system. There was only so many, and I say so many, about 3 agencies that were the go-to for natural disasters. That's the other issue. You need to be able to have community and neighborhood support that can provide resources necessary for resilience. Then that redundancy and those resources need to be done rapidly. They need to be directly supporting communities as quickly as the event has happened. FEMA is actually, as a part of the National Academy's Resilience Roundtable and as a part of a coalition of folks in Louisiana, the FEMA's new policy change about giving families money immediately was something that the state of Louisiana had been lobbying for a long time. So I'm glad they have heard that. But it's not just FEMA. You cannot just depend on that. And I think you guys are fully aware of that. And lastly is robustness. They have to be big and far-reaching and overarching, innovative and multidisciplinary ideas around these concepts. They cannot fully depend on green, and they cannot fully depend on gray. They have to be in multifaceted ideas of solutions that are brought to the table for resilience. All of that to say that in order to tackle housing, which Louisiana did not do, particularly New Orleans did not have a housing problem pre-Katrina. Post-Katrina, 20 years later, we're still missing 40,000 housing units. What has that done? That has caused a housing crisis where most of the housing stock has doubled in value, even though the housing stock is lowered in quality because of so many natural disasters. We are in a conundrum where we can't even get insurance for our homes because most insurance companies deem us too risky, not because of flood vulnerability, but because of the challenges around our housing stock being too old and not willing to or able to withstand climate disasters. So we are looking at a multifaceted amount of solutions, but with those 4 R's in mind, you have to invest in green infrastructure and coastal restoration. There is no way forward. And particularly for Louisiana, where half the state is a floodplain, we don't have another option. I'm also on a climate migration working group in caucus, which I'm actually working with Harvard University on to figure out what does it mean to move people when it's no other option left. And I can tell you that the solution is not easy. In reality, it's not achievable in a plannable way. How do you find a receiving community that's willing to take communities that no longer can live in that space? And what does it mean for your tax base? If you all are elected officials and half your community has to leave because of floodplain, what does that mean for your state and how does it move forward? What are the economics of that? What are the housing challenges around that? It is easier in terms of trauma as well as economic development to live with your ecosystem than to force millions of people to leave and go somewhere else. Louisiana was the first experiment in that, not just in Katrina, but a concept called Ile de Jean Charles, which the indigenous communities of that area have deemed an epic failure. You have to root your work in all of this, I should say, and I repeat this over and over again, in community voice. It has to be a situation where communities are not just stakeholders at the end of the design, but they are with the process from beginning to end. Additionally, community members are more than equipped to deal with policy challenges and are able to create policy that is best for their communities and their neighborhoods. I'll use a very short example that we're creating the first ever community-led stormwater utility fee for New Orleans because we don't have one. And the community members wrote it with us, the organization, and the agencies involved in water management and elected officials from beginning to end, learning about green debt financing, bonds, and so on. And so there is a way forward, but it's going to require those 4 R's. It's going to require new multidisciplinary thinking. It has to be rapidly done. It has to be robust. It has to be redundant. To do all of that, it needs to have community at every single level. Otherwise, when there is a natural disaster, when there is a flooding event, or when you have a housing shortage, you will be in a situation that New Orleans is still digging itself out of almost 20 years later. And so I would love to go into like really deep details about all the things that we do and the technicality, but I wanted to leave you all with an overarching concept, and I'd be happy to dive deep at another time when it is appropriate. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Jessica. And I would recommend people look at all the stories that you've collected of your work with communities. I think it's such a sobering and powerful look at when water is your source of trauma and your source of livelihood that you shared, and all the systems you have to think about when considering that. So thank you so much for everything you do. And I know you're a thought partner of mine, and I think hopefully for our work as we move forward. And we just really appreciate you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah,
Appreciate it.
thank you for joining us. It's a sentimental note, not really relevant to what we're doing, but my daughter was married in New Orleans, and when I spent time there, I said, a remarkable and beautiful place. Yeah.
Well, it's funny because I had to remind myself to say Jessica Dandridge Smith, because the weekend after our Obama leaders convening, Jessica got married.
That's right.
Totally.
That's right. I am a newlywed and also got married and recently gotten married in New Orleans. So I'm very happy for your daughter. She had a wonderful experience. It's a great place to visit, and hopefully we could be here for another 300 years so that more people can get married in this.
Yeah.
I think we all need to be looking at Southeast Asia.
Inspiring to make up excuses to return.
Yes.
All right.
Yes.
So thank you again. We are going to continue taking testimony, and our next guest is Andrea Morganti, a former select board member in Heinsberg. And Ms. Morganti, thank you for making the trip and joining us here today. Good to see you.
Thank you for allowing me to share my experiences of living in what was a rural community. I like to say that when I moved to Heinsberg in 1970 to a 200-year-old farmhouse, I lived on the edge of the historic village. I now live in the middle of the village. And I'm very, very proud and glad to be able to do that. I can walk to my grocery store. I can walk to the hardware store. I can walk to town hall. I now have 24, soon to be 26 units, rental units on the hill above me that was the pasture that the cows grazed on. Just over that hill is another 24 units of senior housing with 24 more units being built. So there'll be 48 units. And standing on the top of the hill, looking down on the elderly housing, I look across at 80 units of condominiums. All of these were built in the late 1980s. High and dry on the east side of Route 116. If you're familiar with Heinsberg at all, Route 116 is the state highway that bisects the town. Heinsberg was a manufacturing town. We hosted one of the second largest cheese factories in the town. Right in the village, I could look out my window at the cheese factory. Milk from all over the state, kind of lower quality milk, came to our cheese factory. We have a sewage treatment plant in our town because we had a cheese factory, and because we became the receiving town for a regional high school in the late 1960s. So as the Clean Water Act was being enacted and there was federal funding for building a sewage treatment plant, Heinsberg benefited greatly from being able to address water quality. Most of the houses in the village were farmhouses with the farmland extending to the west, which was heavy clay soils. So 116 goes on a geological hard bedrock ridge, which provided, good resource. And all the development that happened in the 1980s, because we were encouraging compact growth, trying to do that, and at the same time preserving our farmland. We benefit from being at the southern edge of Chittenden County. Sometimes we like to think that we might be the northern edge of Addison County and maintain some of our rural lifestyles. We have worked very hard to have compact growth and settlement within our village. And we were able to achieve that because we did have water and sewer. But none of that water and sewer served was connected to the housing in the lowland that had been ag land, that was heavy clay soils, very similar to and the same as in Addison County. The cheese factory burned, and it was the major employer in town and the major user, and the way that we afforded our sewer treatment plant. They paid at least 75% of the costs of our sewage treatment plant. Along the way, the sewage treatment plant was we had to upgrade it always to meet the new phosphorus requirements. And we finally got the cheese factory to build some pre-treatment plants, because the easiest way for them to deal with overflows at the cheese factory was to just send them to the town. And so if anybody remembers driving through Heinsberg in the 1970s and 1980s, we were known as the smelly town. It's pretty bad. And so we're now faced, so we've worked very hard at revising our zoning. And I will provide some written testimony after hearing what everybody has had to say today. But just want to explain the nature of relying on municipal regulations and the importance that Act 250 has played in addressing issues that a municipal town of our size has not really been able to address. We've worked on doing the zoning to increase the density and to show on paper what looks like perfectly developable land. What we have not done is recognize, and I see this time and again in our references to Act 250 and to regulations and to neighborhood development areas, is to recognize the really important ecological services that need to be maintained and act as prevention for flooding and for allowing wildlife to continue through our riparian corridors. We can't think about compact villages and settlement patterns and in our minds picture 19th and 20th century villages, because we have seen the result of those settlements. In Heinsberg, we never had any flooding issues because it was farmland on the west side of town. And those farm fields were highly productive farmlands because they did flood because the sediment settled there and provided the nutrients to grow really good crops. We thought we adopted regulations that would protect people from flooding. Oftentimes, our regulations regarding rivers and streams have sought to protect the houses and the property. They have not been written to protect the systems that think about the watershed and water resources in the whole. And so our regulations that are adopted by municipalities to address flooding and river corridors are parochial. They are determined by who owns that land that looks like it's really could be developed. But our mobile home parks were developed oftentimes throughout the state, on the least productive land, the leftover land, which we've seen are the lands that flood. Heinsberg has 3 mobile home parks, which actually happen to be up on the high and dry areas, but their problem was that they didn't have potable water. And so we expanded our water line to give them potable water. They still don't have the best septic systems, and we can't really do that. So I would just like to say that our concept of what a compact village and settlement pattern needs to recognize our opportunities for prevention. We have a small river, the La Platte River. I oftentimes joke that the source of the La Platte River is the sewage treatment plant. There is almost as much water flowing, and with the future development that is predicted, flowing into our sewage treatment plant from the homes than there is from the natural rivers and streams that flow there. We've worked really hard in the town of Heinsberg to conserve land with the help of the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board, with the Vermont Land Trust. We've conserved thousands of acres for farmland and forest land. We're at a very interesting geographic place within the state of having excellent forests and excellent farmland. The situation that we're in is that recently, through the development review process, housing over the last 15 years has been allowed within what had been farmland, and through a series of loopholes, I'm calling them loopholes, between how we regulate wetlands and river corridors, houses have been built in the floodplain. July, we didn't see we had a 100-year storm event. It didn't impact people's houses because they were sitting on fill. And the regulations were, if you build your house 1 foot above the base flood elevation, you're protecting that house. But what is happening is that our public infrastructure is being flooded because the water has no place to go. There is currently a new proposal to add on to this development that was built like 15 years ago of adding additional fill that was allowed in our regulations, because our regulations deal with the statement about additional fill within the floodplain is it can create no undue adverse impact. The state regulations call for no adverse impacts. There was constant testimony given at the Development Review Board to recognize that this was not going to meet the Act 250 criteria, but it got approved anyway. And we in Heinsberg want to encourage housing. We've adopted inclusionary zoning, which private developers have reluctantly added into their projects, but always finding a way of shoving those housing units or apartments or rental off to the side. I urge you to think about this Tier 1 designation by assuring that municipal regulations can at least meet the standards that are recognized within Act 250. The same thing happens with stormwater regulations. is that the stormwater regulations look at a particular development. What we're missing is understanding how these ecological systems are functioning to prevent bad situations, to prevent the flooding, and that we can use them. So I urge you, as we're thinking about Tier 1, that we recognize the important ecological services that are being, that are functioning. So prevention, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of remediation, or whatever that expression is, right? It's like an ounce of prevention. I also have accumulated a fair amount of knowledge of watersheds beginning in the late 1980s by recognizing that we need to think about our rivers and streams beyond boundaries, and by initiating efforts to create watershed organizations. And so we have the data. It's really important that you, both committees, are sitting here, because it's not an either or, it's a both and. We can have these vibrant villages, but we might in the middle have this really protected floodplain. So we have two villages, and maybe it's a 20-minute walk and not a 10-minute walk between them. So thank you very much for the opportunity to speak and take part.
Thank you so much for joining us. And our final guest of the morning, close out the meeting, is Nicole Maloney of Moortown. Good morning, and thank you for beaming in from Moortown.
Good morning. Thank you all so much for your time. And to both Jessica and Andrea, I just caught both their testimonies. They are so on point and so valuable. So thank you both for sharing that. I'm very much in line with both of what those women said. So I'm here to share my experience as a lower income community member navigating this nearly impossible housing market. I'm a local librarian here in Moortown. I'm also an artist and entrepreneur. I've had my own business for 10 years. I'm a manual laborer, a community organizer. I sort of just am. And I am finding it very hard to live here. I've been living in unsafe and insecure housing for 3 years now. And despite my best efforts, I have found little to no relief. And have actually found myself being less resourced and less effective as a community member because of this experience. And I know that this is the case when we're being faced with insecure housing. We cannot live up to our full potential. And we're carrying a very heavy burden right now. It tells us, people in my position, that we're not valued and we're undeserving of safe housing. And we're very unsatisfied with the resources available. So my story definitely has something to do with scarcity of housing, as well as flooding and other environmental factors that it is impacting those of us who are vulnerable in a different way than property owners. But it also has to do with neglect, abuse of power, a disregard for the health and safety of tenants by those who are resourced enough and have the privilege of housing others. So my particular situation, I've been stuck living in the same living situation for 3 years now in Moortown Village. It's a multi-unit tenant building. It's also in the lowest point of a floodplain. It's a wonderful community. I love this village. We're surrounded by nature. My neighbors are fantastic. I love being able to walk to the library to work. But the building I live in has been neglected for decades. It's one of the many aging houses in Vermont. So it's owned by someone who can only be described as an absentee landlord who owns many properties in the same state of disrepair, whose only objective seems to be to maximize profits, minimize spending on property maintenance, and who targets vulnerable people as tenants that they can intimidate. What I just said is textbook definition of a slumlord. There's no meaningful effort to safely house people in this building or any of his buildings. And this is not a unique situation. This is happening all over Vermont and the nation. But it's a serious issue because there's not a lot a tenant can do in these situations, and we don't have a lot of other options. So just an overview, this is a non-exhaustive list of the conditions here, but there is inconsistent access to utilities such as heat, running water, internet, electricity, so forth. This landlord hasn't paid any of his bills, so the electricity is constantly getting shut off. We were flooded back in December, which affected our water pump. So this whole month I've had inconsistent access to running water for, days, weeks at a time. Now we're dealing with freezing pipes because there's a hole blown through the basement from where it flooded, installations on the floor, huge risk of electrical fire. There's many infestations happening. There's rats in the walls, there's carpenter ants, there's squirrels. There's a whole system of tunnels in the yard where you're just sinking into it. So, the structural integrity is up for debate. There's mold everywhere. In mostly, where we can't see it, but, in the ceilings, in the basements, in the walls, drafts, inoperable doors and windows, and other just major health and safety violations that have been confirmed by our town health officer, by the fire marshal, as well as the state, because we have been to court over this over a year ago. This man is currently $200 in debt and fines. He's accrued that much in fines over the past year and has done absolutely nothing to remedy any of this. So that's the situation.
$200,000?
$200,000, right?
Yeah, 500. He's been getting fined $500 a day since February to coerce him to address some of these issues, which he has not done. So that's the condition that I'm living in. And it's very stressful. It's very stressful when you can't take a shower, you can't wash your dishes, the heat's not working. My downstairs neighbor hasn't had heat for 5 years, so she usually comes and showers in my apartment because she has no hot water either. And we're sick. We're all unwell here. And we're also the rent. We don't pay. We have to pay our own utilities, and the rent is already $1,200, which is more. That is 3/4 of my income. So it's just this is violence. This is an extreme case of violence. There is nothing else we can do. Even if there was other places to go, the current rate of the market, we can't afford it. We're grown adults who all have full-time jobs. I mentioned I'm a librarian. We have a postal worker who lives here. We have someone who works in voting. We have a construction worker. I mean, we are the people that live here. So what else? I have my little list of notes over here. So I think the biggest frustration here is I've gone down every avenue of legal aid, capstone, community funds. There's just not a lot of people. There's not a lot that can be done that is a meaningful long-term situation. Maybe they can help pay a bill here or there, but there's no, this is not sustainable. And it's unacceptable that these landlords or people that are in these positions that are responsible for housing others are able to operate like this and collect, any sort of government aid that, isn't available to tenants. Anything that is a resource for tenants actually goes to the landlord, whether it's rental assistance or grants or whatever. The tenants themselves have no autonomy, because I've tried to apply for grants to fix my roof, but unless the landlord is participating, there's no relief. And I know that my landlord has collected state funds. When Irene came, because this building was flooded to the second floor, he did nothing with it. He took it. Not a lot has been done since then. And he preys on people that are desperate. So, this is a very unique case. This is about an individual who's acting this way, but this is also about the system that allows this to happen, regardless of how many laws exist to protect tenants. It doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter, because our only option is to leave. And that in and of itself is an incredibly large investment, not only emotionally, but financially, to pack up your life, move out of your home, and find somewhere else to go. Where in my case, if I left this village, I would have to get a new job. I would have to build a new community and support system. I am part of this community. And we're also facing food is unaffordable, along with the cost of labor or the cost of services or, building materials. For me to be able to house myself in a meaningful way, it's inaccessible. It's a huge issue. And so I really appreciate what Jessica was saying about this being a community issue. If we want to house our community members, the burden needs to be carried by more than just the individual, because this is not working. We also have the oldest housing stock in the country. And if nothing changes in the way that we are able to maintain these homes, we're going to lose houses as fast as we're able to build them. And just like Andrea was saying, is that what we really want, is to build all these new units when we have perfectly viable housing already available? But just the way that, tenant landlord relationships work, it's medieval. We have no way of actually safely and securely housing ourselves, which I know most of us are willing to do. We want to be able to play an active role in housing ourselves. Speaking of, there is plenty of viable housing available right now. It's just not accessible. And it's because it's being used as short-term rentals, where it is occupied for a couple nights a week for insane rates, $300, $400 a night, which is not realistic. And then they're empty. They're completely vacant, and they would be perfect housing opportunities for single people, artists, entrepreneurs like myself, small families, single moms. There's no reason. I mean, other than the fact that it's private property and it is up to those individuals to make those choices, whether they can afford it or not. I know a lot of people have these Airbnbs to sustain their own situation, but if the state was putting their resources into those types of situations instead of the hotel motel situation, which is, short term and not really dignified for the people that are staying in those situations, I think we would be able to come together as a community and know each other and want to house each other, and have it not just be this business transaction where landlords are literally just making their money off of taking the better part of our income as working people. So I think that's my biggest point, that this is my situation. It's not unique. I am so grateful for my support systems that have allowed me to sustain living in this situation. But I'm watching people just end up on the street because this is very hard to navigate. I have used so much of my time and energy and resources to advocate for myself and my fellow tenants, going to select board meetings, on the phone, fighting bills, dealing with the psychological torment of having to deal with a human being who just has absolute disregard for everyone else. And they're responsible for all of this, yet we are carrying the burden. So I really urge you to continue to invite people like me and other people in this situation to help solve this problem, because we want to be a part of this. We are frustrated that we don't have more autonomy and means to be a part of the solution.
Well, thank you so much for joining us and, adding your really essential voice to the conversation, just as we've been talking about. Hear from everyone. It's a very complicated, ecosystem of people, land owners, landlords, tenants, and people who are in a difficult position like yours, I think, are too often not at the table when we have the important.
Nicole, I have spoken to the VBA because I think you'd mentioned needing some pro bono help. And so we've got, maybe have some help on the way with the Vermont Bar Association. So, because your testimony was so compelling 2 weeks ago. It was. So,
Thank you. I appreciate that. It would be great to have some personal relief in this matter, but really considering this part of the puzzle that is creating such pressure on the housing market. Because there's no way, I mean, the wages we make are the wages we make. So unless everything is coming up to match the market, we're we're going to be continually drained of our resources and not be able to house ourselves and have to rely more heavily on the systems. That
Thank
would-
you. Yeah. And you're speaking to an experience where a lot of people in your position don't have the time and the capacity and the wherewithal to speak to us. So you're representing one of the least heard and most important voices in this conversation. And I know that takes time that you don't have out of your schedule. So we really appreciate this. And
So much.
you shouldn't be living in conditions like this in Vermont or the
No one.
country. And we're very
And I'm so grateful that I do have a roof over my head. I know that I'm trying very hard to not rock the boat too much because everyone here right now has a roof. So we're not trying to condemn this building or be evicted with nowhere to go. So this is a very delicate situation. We know we're living in danger, but it's better than being out in the elements, which is no one should be out there right now. We have enough housing to get these people under a roof. And that's all I have to say. We need to do better to get them into safe housing and prioritize our community members before tourists or, whoever it is that's renting
Here,
these
here.
short-term
We're
rentals.
right with you.
thank you,
Okay.
Nicole.
So thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Ms. Maloney, for bringing the closer for the morning.
Yeah.
It's been a really informative and helpful morning on lots of levels. So thanks to my colleague, Senator Hinsdale, for helping put together a joint meeting.
Well done, you two.
Yes,
Nice work.
Yeah.
good to have the two committees sitting together, doing this.
We're so often, we know what it's like to be in a hearing that's yes, no, yes, no. And I'm just really heartened that we just heard a lot of agreement and a lot of the unmet need is shared work between us. So